the 1991 FA Cup final. Of course, BBC Television will be bringing you all the action just as if you were here, but if you want to know what the Stars are doing when you're not watching them, you've got to read the Radio Times. The biggest guide around not only previews the best in TV and radio, but is entertainment itself. Too good to be true? Well, that's what they say about Gary Lineker. But if you want to find out for yourself, you'll have to read the Radio Times. Radio Times. If it's on, it's in.
And if it's on, the chances are you've made a comment on it. Here's Anne Robinson with this week's Points of View.
Good evening, and let me warn you to stay well clear of the telly so as not to catch my cold. Anyway, within seconds, you are going to be scratching your head.
Considering we're just entering National School Nursing Week, we were very sad to see tonight on EastEnders a child with head lice being threatened with the knit nurse, and Mr Fowler saying he felt head lice was a school's problem.
Mrs Matthews, Mrs Fowler, no relation, and Mrs Drummond, who are all SRNs and school nurses working out of the North Endon Health Centre in Manchester, say this unfortunate piece of dialogue has caused them no end of grief.
Today in school we've been called knit nurse, a title we've deservedly lost in the last few years. It's very distressing to see how ill-informed you are about our role.
And while he's still scratching, P. Fairless of Carden wants to tell Arthur Fowler that head lice is not just a school's problem.
There is a country-wide epidemic of these horrid creatures, and the whole family needs to be treated, not just the kids.
EastEnders, incidentally, is on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and a double dose. Sundays, Knots Landing, on the other hand, is on the occasional Wednesday. It should, by rights, be on every Wednesday, but it isn't, because...
Every time the Beeb wishes to show poxy racing, poxy snooker...
or, for that matter...
poxy anything else that takes their fancy, it's just not on.
That protest from Janet, Sarah, Sue, Jill, Laurie, Jackie and Susan are echoed, as we know, by everyone home in the afternoon in Essex. And from programmes that aren't there to ones...
hidden away, like the real McCoy on Fridays.
John Sharkman says this seems to bear a remarkable resemblance to You've Got to Be Joking, except...
It's funny.
It is.
Let me tell you what it's like being a squaddie. First off, it's dangerous. Even more dangerous than living in Tottenham. Just. I remember walking down Tottenham High Street, getting hassled. Once I even got done for wearing a belt. They said it was an offensive weapon. Now, gun, hand grenades, knife, boots, and I can walk the streets anywhere. No one says anything. Mind you, they still won't let me wear a belt, though.
That from the real McCoy. Family Matters on Monday explored children's fashions. Trainers, for example, at £70 a time. At worst, it reported the demands of fashion can lead to violence and crime. But fashion can also, it insisted, be an important, if expensive, source of pleasure. Pleasure to children, presumably, rather than their poor mothers who have to foot the bill. Anyway, Damon Hammond of Portsmouth considered...
the sight of children brainwashed and indulged in their ludicrous and costly obsession with the mores of modern Barbie doll fashions was ominous. And the plight of the poor little girl physically attacked for the crime of wearing economical clothes presented the best argument for school uniforms I have yet to hear.
Furthermore, said Mr Hammond...
neither this girl nor the independent-minded young boy who disdained juvenile fashion fetishes was brought into the conversation, while the guest psychologist and the champion of the fashion business patronisingly belittled the parents who dared to suggest children should be taught the value of money.
Ruth Barsby in Bristol said she was totally amazed that anyone could afford to spend £100 per summer on a child's clothes, but then found herself even more amazed again
by the psychologist's comment at the end that children do not learn by being taught. Did he really mean to say that? If so, what's the point of schools? Are we all wasting our time and energy?
Well, I think what he actually meant was children learn more by experience. A great many letters asking, what's the point of running a magnificent spy thriller like Tinker Tailor Soldier, of which half the fun is guessing who's the spy, when just 2 episodes on...
his identity is disclosed in one of the answers in A Question of Entertainment.
Yet another brilliant example, said Stuart Gillett.
Of thoughtful planning by the Beeb.
Which brings us to Sex and Scarf, as in Gerald, and the first of 2 programmes in which the award-winning cartoonist set off with his sketchpad to look at the subject in depth.
Scarf on Sex was a pathetic attempt at intellectualising vulgarity and voyeurism. Whatever next?
In fact, Miss Frances of Letchworth, what came next was Scarf on Art, with Gerald taking 2 pictures hastily painted by himself and a Picasso worth £500,000 to the railings in Bayswater to see which sold fastest.
One took me 2 minutes. Price, 1,500. I'll call it Splash Drips. Artist atelier, a genuine Picasso valued at £500,000, and a picture painted by a revolutionary new method. Must be worth 5,000. I'll call it Blue Moons.
This is my favorite. The color and everything that goes with it, you know, it's got really a depth about it. This is a super. If I could, I would buy it. And then after that would be that.
What would you say if I told you that was a Picasso?
I'll give you £10 for the frame.
So much for Picasso. Now, in response to the ongoing news coverage of natural disasters in various parts of the world and the tragic consequences, Mrs. G.K. Wood of Tamworth writes,
While preparing our evening meal, my husband drew my attention to an item concerning the plight of the Kurdish people on the 6 o'clock news. The pictures of a small child dying in front of my eyes are perhaps the most horrifying thing I've ever seen on television. But I feel that in transmitting this news item, the dignity of the child was not taken into consideration. She and her parents were not granted the privacy they should be entitled to.
Last Sunday, a live concert in aid of the Kurdish refugees brought together such names as Paul Simon, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Rod Stewart, Christa Berg. Most thoroughly enjoyed and appreciated their efforts, which raised an estimated £10 million to add to the 10 already promised by the government. Although Mrs. Devereux of Bodmin says that herself, her husband and 17 friends wondered.
Did the organisers ever give any consideration to all the people over 40 who do not appreciate awful youngster music?
Oh, I think they did, Mrs. D, because according to Mrs. P. Sloane...
The programme was completely spoiled for me when at the end Geoffrey Archer had the audacity to say he hoped the old fogies were watching.
Very Geoffrey Archer, that. And why John Webber of Essex very reasonably wanted to know.
Was Sinead O'Connor featured when she publicly supported Saddam Hussein, who has forced the Kurds to flee?
Better ask Geoffrey Archer. Finally, the story of America's bloodiest 19th century conflict, the Civil War. This 6-part series, which finished on Saturday, has been hailed as a landmark in documentary filmmaking. It included archived photos, period paintings, and first-person accounts read by well-known stars. Dozens of letters of praise. You missed it? Here's a little bit.
There's a flurry of anticipation on BBC2 shortly with the 4077th MASH. And that's followed at 9:25 by part 2 of the Australian drama The Paperman. The empire-building Cromwell continues his ruthless climb to the top of the media stack, setting his sights on a new goal, television.
I told her what I intended to do, and that if she didn't comply, I would kill her.
I'm going to suggest to you that you raped this girl, that you had sex with her without her consent. What do you say to that?
People tend to imagine that rape is a purely sexual crime. It isn't. Rape is a crime of violence. Violence against women.
All I was thinking was I don't want him to die. I didn't want him to rape me either, but I let him do it because I was so afraid of dying.
A very serious offence. Inside Story in half an hour.
First on BBC1 at 9 o'clock, we join Michael Burke in the newsroom.
The deadlock over the Ulster talks has been broken. The unionists go to Downing Street and agree to start negotiations on Monday. The European Commission wants to ban all tobacco advertising. And Manchester United are on the verge of winning the European Cup Winners' Cup.